happily surprised that you guys were able to declare so quickly that this was a recession. I know in '07 it took almost a full year. What made it such a clear call?
Well, first, I don't think we surprised too many people by saying that the U.S. economy had declined after sometime early this year. But what was very striking about this downturn is, of course, its speed and its depth, and that made the analysis, substantially easier in terms of the data that we see. What we observe is that there was a dramatic drop-off, as we all know, in economic activity during the second half of March, resulting in dramatic increases in unemployment, dramatic declines in production, and for reasons that in some sense are not the usual sources of business cycle fluctuations, essentially government edicts which were closing down many sectors of the economy. Situations like that make it a little bit easier to identify where the turning point might be than in a more normal situation.
Can you explain why February? We understand that the expansion has to kind of peak in the month and then the contraction begins. And I know you put a lot of weight in particular on employment and production, but jobless claims were still fine in February. The U.S. added jobs. Why not have the recession beginning in March?
I think I'm very glad you asked, because it's that the answer is in some sense about the convention the NBER uses when it defines the first month of a recession. The key starting point is the peak of economic activity was in February, right? And March was therefore lower than February. When we say that March is the first month of the downturn, that means that in some sense, month zero, the month in which the recession began, is constructed as February in that. But I think it's easier to think in terms of when the peak was, and the monthly peak was very clearly in February.
Interesting. Month zero, Steve. It reminds me of trying to figure out what year. Month zero is the start of this recession.
Yeah, and that's just the way it's done. But if I could, I want to ask Jim a couple quick questions here. Jim, we love having you back, but let's say we don't want to have you back and we don't want to wait for the NBER to declare the end of the recession. How will we know that it's over? What will you guys be looking at? That's one. And two, discuss this curious line in the towards the end of your release here, where it says it warrants the designation of a recession, quote, even if it turns out to be briefer than earlier contractions. There's a sense there that you guys have this feeling that maybe this is going to be over pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the second, Steve, and want to emphasize that the committee has no crystal ball, right? So we don't have a view of how long the recession might last. But you are right that the committee acted more quickly this time than it typically does. And as the committee was contemplating whether or not it could determine that the peak had been passed and that we peaked in February, one question was, well, given the definition of a recession, which is usually a decline in economic activity spread across the economy for a period of several months, did we know yet whether it would be for several months? And we were confident that we could see, in the existing data that there was a sharp decline in March and in April. We were not sure, of course, yet what was going to happen after that. And the committee, was in some sense with that remark was trying to speak to even if the trough turns out to be 2 months after the peak, the depth of this downturn is such that the committee felt comfortable labeling that as a recession.